We all know what a Ponzi scheme is, or at least have an idea of what those illegal and immoral activities are and how it affects the victims. However, few know anything about the man that these illegal activities are named after. In fact, many did not know that this was a well-respected man, at least to a certain degree, before his whole house of fabricated cards came falling down on his world. Once blessed with millions of dollars that he made while in charge of a business that had people begging him to take their money like that Futurama meme, his story has now become something of a warning to those looking to invest in businesses that just seem too good to be true. How exactly did this man become the world-class scammer that destroyed the lives of many, so much so that these sorts of scams are now named after him more than a century onwards? Join us as we tell you the story of the man behind the Ponzi scheme. A life of high tastes. Perhaps you already knew this, or you could derive his origins from his name, but what many may not know is that Charles Ponzi was actually an Italian born in Lugo, Emilia-Romagna, Kingdom of Italy. Born on the 3rd of March 1882 to a hardworking father who was a postman for most of his life, Charles always seemed to have aspirations of wealth, even from a young age. This was said to be because he got wind of the fact that his grandparents and his great-grandparents were all successful businessmen and high-ranking officials in their own right. Believing that he was living below his station despite his parents' humble and comfortable household, Charlie Boy desired a life of wealth and leisure, and as we all know, if that is not already available to you and you have to work for it, it's not going to work out for you if you believe it is your right. Time would eventually tell what this young man would do with any money that came to him, because when he was a teenager, he inherited a decent amount of money when his father eventually died. With this money in hand, he decided to obey his mother, who wanted him to go to college by enrolling in University of Rome La Sapienza. Unfortunately, rather than attending the classes that would help him gain the information that would lead to his wealth and affluence, the young man blew through his savings by indulging in the high life with his more affluent friends. There wasn't a fancy suit that the boy didn't own, and there wasn't a fancy restaurant that the boy did not patronize in Rome. In his head, he was a wealthy young man. Unfortunately, reality may delay, but it never lies. Soon, he found that he had run through his savings, and even worse, he also flunked out. Rather than being humble in his neglect of his studies, the arrogant young man even turned down a job offer to work as a clerk with his uncle. Instead, he decided that he'd rather chase his fortune in the new world, the United States of America. New shore, new fortune? Maybe not. At the turn of the century, Ponzi made it to Boston in 1903. Looking to redeem himself back home in Italy, he set out to find his fortune in the US. However, reality made itself clear to the young man. Without the support of the fortune that he ate through and the support of his family, Ponzi was going to have to adapt to the conditions he's put himself in. For the next few years, he wandered from state to state, working any menial job he could find to make ends meet. Unfortunately, Ponzi wasn't cut out for menial work, because if he didn't get fired because he hated the job, he got fired because he tried to swindle the unsuspecting customer. This took him to new low after new low, because if he didn't beg for meals at some point, he'd have to sleep in parks and other public spaces until he made some money. That clerk job with his uncle was probably looking great at that point. However, it seemed unlikely that he'd actually learned anything from his experiences, because reports have it that whenever he made a decent sum of money, it all went to the high life that he loved. Tired of barely surviving in the US, Ponzi moved to Montreal, Canada with the hopes that his life would change for the better, and initially it worked. He managed to get the same clerk job that he turned his nose up at back in Italy when he took the job with Banco Zerosi. Not too good for it now, huh? Working for the bank that catered to Italian immigrants, things were moving well until he realized that his boss, Luigi Zerosi, was a con man. Apparently, this was where the young man got familiar with the concept of robbing Peter to pay Paul. This means that he was taking the money of his new clients to satisfy the demands of the old ones. Apparently, he was able to do this by imposing a 6% interest rate on all deposits, something that was double the average rate of the times. What Ponzi failed to take into account in his lessons is that eventually, the clients, or the marks if you will start getting suspicious. This is exactly what happened when those expecting the money from the bank never received it. As a result, Zerosi fled Montreal when the authorities decided to investigate the bank's activities, but not without fleeing with some money. Looking to evade liability, Ponzi tried to flee as well, but he messed himself up by trying to cash a forged check before he ran back to the US. Unfortunately, he was apprehended and was forced to endure 3 years in prison. Alas, as incredible as this may seem, especially with his experience in the past, this would prove to be just the beginning of the young man's downfall. Return to the US. Following his release after just 2 years in prison, the fact that he tried to return to the US with 5 illegal Italian immigrants proved that our boy was impervious to life lessons. Rather than getting the money he desired, he got to spend another 2 years in prison for his efforts. Once he was released, his plans to become rich took a back seat again as he wandered from state to state in a bid to make ends meet. Soon he found a job as a clerk in the JR Pool Company, showing that he could never evade his destiny as a clerk. However, this time he managed to settle on this job for a while. Not only did he get promoted, he even got married to a 21-year-old woman who went by the name Rose Necco in 1918. Unfortunately, this never quenched his thirst for wealth and affluence. Consequently, Ponzi left his comfy job at JR Pool as he began his quest for wealth. At first, he decided to work with his father-in-law's wholesale fruit business. Unfortunately, this proved to be another failure because despite bragging about his financial news, he eventually bankrupted the admittedly already failing business. Undeterred, he attempted to establish his own import and export business instead, but he failed to attract any business. Rather than packing it in, he decided to invest in advertising. Unfortunately, he couldn't bear the cost for long, so this business packed up as well. Again, he decided to turn his attention elsewhere, and this time, he decided to try his luck with advertising, despite having zero experience in the business. Nonetheless, he decided to set up an advertising magazine called The Trader's Guide so that people would pay him to advertise their products and businesses. Unfortunately, despite his aspirations, simply put, nobody cared about his magazine. He couldn't even secure a loan to sustain the business. However, as bad as things were getting, he seemed to be getting a much-needed break. This came in the form of the one Spanish contact who requested for a copy of his magazine. To pay for delivery of the package, the Spaniard included an international reply coupon in his package. Also known as an IRC, this was used by people who were expecting a reply to their letters and deliveries, so the coupon covered the costs of such replies. What seemed to be an innocuous item would prove to be the eventual downfall of the scam artist. The Ponzi scheme. Looking to take a tidy profit from selling a ton of IRCs, Ponzi started the Securities Exchange Company in 1920. At first, he may have tried to walk the line with the law, but reality as to the low profit margins dashed away any chances of that occurring. Rather than trying something else, he decided to scam people who invested in his business by taking a page out of Banco Zerossi's mode of operation. Now he'd be the one to rob Peter to pay Paul. Thanks to his charisma, he was able to convince people to give him his money. Rather than using it in the business, he enriched himself while using a bit of the money to pay these investors. This not only made them believe in what is now known as the Ponzi scheme, but it also made them invest more money in it. Some even spread the word to their friends, who in turn also invested in the Ponzi scheme. Some even gave this man their life savings. All he did was give the old investors the new investors' money while he spent the majority of it to maintain his wealth. This wasn't new at the time. After all, Adele Spitzaler was documented as the first person to exploit people with this scheme back in the 1870s before William Miller's own scheme to con investors out of $1 million eventually failed in 1899. As such, Ponzi should have known that this bubble would eventually burst as he failed to get new investors. However, at that time, he was all about living a lavish life, and boy, did he do just that. While offering investors double their money within 90 days, he enjoyed their money thoroughly, moving into lavish mansions and smoking cigars out of diamond-encrusted cigar holders while taking advantage of the financially illiterate, if you will. Anybody who looked into the business would see that such profits must have been fabricated, but Ponzi made sure he preyed on those hoping to make quick money. He was even hailed as a financial genius by the Boston Post as he eventually started making $250,000 a day at the peak of his powers. This finally allowed him to live the lavish life he felt he deserved. However, this would only last for about 6 months. Soon, people began to get suspicious. Where was their money? Initially, the dissenters were scared of voicing their opinions because Ponzi was able to successfully sue a financial analyst for libel because he became aware of Ponzi's scheme. However, the Boston Post brought in Clarence Barron, the president of Dow Jones and the manager of the Wall Street Journal. Rich, coming from the media outlet that labeled the man as a financial genius. However, they couldn't ignore the fact that Ponzi would have needed millions of these IRCs to make the business work. That would have been fair enough if there weren't only 27,000 in circulation on Earth. Alas, the bubble had burst. Ponzi attempted to evade prosecution by appearing so open, he hired a man named William Masters as his publicist. Alas, Masters was no con man, and soon he called Ponzi out as the fraudster that he was, even winning a Pulitzer for his article in the Boston Post. As his world collapsed around him, Ponzi faced 86 counts of mail fraud. To his victims' dismay, he was able to get away with all but one of the charges, for which he only spent 3 years out of his 5-year sentence in prison. Game over. Rather than turning his life around, Ponzi tried to pull his trick off in Florida by selling valueless swampland, but the fish didn't buy this time. Instead, he only managed to get arrested as he attempted to flee America. This time he did 7 years in prison, and this time it destroyed him. Divorced and destitute, he gave up the ghost in Brazil where he was buried in a pauper's grave in 1949. This serves as a stark reminder that it's every day for the thief, one day for the owner. Sure, you are allowed to live big, but do that on your own dime, not on others. That way you won't have to set up a Ponzi scheme of your own. That brings our video to an end. Do you want to learn about someone who made enough money for several generations? Come learn about J.P. Morgan, the man who owned America. Don't forget to like and subscribe as well. Until next time, goodbye.